speaking.
Wow.
Yeah. And
wow.
just
Oh,
don't
maybe
need-
we shouldn't have known that.
I don't think we need to know that. Yeah.
City of Yarra represent. Everyone wants to hear what we're doing.
Just because the 9 of us.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're officially live.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. We'll just wait a few seconds as people connect into the call. Good. I can see the participant numbers jumping up. So just we'll just give a few seconds as people join in the call. But start by saying thank you very much to everybody for joining us this afternoon on our ADIA webinar. My name's David Spriggs. I'm the CEO of the Info Exchange Group, and in this context, I'm the chair of the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance. I'm based in Melbourne, as all our panelists today, and so we're enduring lockdown here, and so kind of the standard apologies that go with any of these sorts of webinars, particularly for me with 2 young children, that you might see others come and join us during the panel, and we choose to love and embrace that at this time rather than seeing it as something saying no, please be quiet, I'm on a call. So please work with us on that. But really pleased you're able to join our online meetup today to talk about digital inclusion during COVID-19 and really look at it today from a local context and look at what community organisations have been doing. Some housekeeping. If I could ask everybody to put yourselves on mute, you should be on mute anyway, but keep yourselves on mute. We would like though for you to be interactive and engage with us today. So there's the chat button at the bottom of the screen there, and there's also a Q&A button. And so we'd encourage you, as each of the panelists are speaking today, to put in questions as they're speaking, and then I'll come back after each of the panelists to sort of pose some of the questions that have come through. If you've got any issues with your bandwidth, if you can't hear us very clearly, you can turn off your video and listen to us. And just a note also that we're recording today's session. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're all meeting on today. For myself, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and ask for each of you to think about the traditional owners of the land that you're on in each of the locations you're joining us from. And I think today as well, it's a really important day, and we should acknowledge the announcement today of the new Closing the Gap agreement, which for the very first time has been developed in a true partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and Indigenous organisations and peak bodies across the country. And I think should really thank Pat Turner in particular for her leadership on that. And given we're talking about digital inclusion today, I think also just to acknowledge how far we still have to go in closing the gap for Indigenous communities and digital inclusion. Each Australian Digital Inclusion Index that we see that there's a significant gap between Indigenous communities and others across Australia. I think also probably today we should just acknowledge the context that we're meeting in around COVID-19 and terrible announcement, over 700 new cases of COVID-19 announced in Victoria overnight and 13 deaths. So really our heart goes out to everybody that's been affected by this, particularly those in aged care, and really our heart goes out to absolutely all of the family and friends who have lost family members and friends as a result of this terrible tragedy. So moving on to our webinar today, and as I say, it's kind of going to be on sort of the local issues that have been faced around digital inclusion. The last webinar we had for the ADIA, we had a fantastic panel speaking about some of the national issues and how we're addressing some of those issues from a national perspective. But today I'm really pleased and really looking forward to hearing from the community organisations that are joining us on the sort of the digital inclusion challenges on the front line. It's one thing to make all of these announcements about these great programs, but are they really getting through to the people who need them. What are some of the challenges people are seeing, and how are they addressing it? So delighted to be joined by a group of people from within the City of Yarra, and just to quickly introduce each of our panellists. So we have Marie Foles with us from the Neighbourhood Justice Centre. Marie's the Family Violence Partnerships Coordinator and has also been a really leading part of the COVID community response network across Yarra. We have Mel Morell with a very colourful background there, who's the Community Development Coordinator and Manager of the Open Door Community Hub at the Carlton Neighbourhood Learning Centre. She's very much been on the front line of education and remote learning in this environment that we've all been thrown into with remote learning in schools. We've got Ray Chin, who's the Community Development Manager at Carringbush Adult Education, and brings that perspective of the adult education side, but working with community members from non-English speaking backgrounds and some of the challenges there. We have Connor Sibley, who's a community development worker at the Belgium Avenue Neighbourhood House. He's been involved in the North Richmond Capacity Building Initiative. I know he's done a lot of work over many years in the public housing estates. Natasha Savic, who's the Coordinator of Resources and Technology at Yarra Libraries. Natasha's probably well known to most of you, has been a champion of digital literacy and digital skills for many, many years, has been involved from the very beginning of the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance. And a special thank you to Natasha, who's really shown the leadership in pulling today's webinar together and inviting the panellists that we've got here. And then last but certainly not least, we have Jess Perrin, who's the Head of Social Innovation and Digital Inclusion at Info Exchange. Jess's team has worked for many years across City of Yarra, in particular in the public housing estates, from the early days of Info Exchange and wiring up some of those estates and providing digital skills building programs, and can probably give a perspective on some of the other things that are happening across the country today as well. You won't necessarily be hearing from, but you might also be able to see on the screen Ben and Ishtar from ADIA, and my thanks very much to Ben and Ishtar for organising the session today. So before inviting each of the panellists to speak, I thought I might just make a few opening comments to set the scene. And before talking about digital inclusion, I thought probably we should talk a little bit about City of Yarra for those that might be joining us outside of Melbourne. So City of Yarra sort of starts on the edge of the Melbourne CBD and is essentially the suburbs in the inner northeast corridor of Melbourne. So well-known suburbs you would have heard of, often have football teams in Richmond, Collingwood, Fitzroy, Clifton Hill, North Carlton, which is near to where I am now. But it's a really rich, vibrant and diverse community. And I was looking at some of the statistics, and 40% of residents were born outside of Australia. I think 1/5 of residents come from non-English speaking backgrounds. A high proportion of residents living with low incomes, and we have a significant proportion of Melbourne's public housing estates within City of Yarra, and a growing population of older residents as well. And these are all things that we know contribute to higher levels of digital exclusion. A quick bit of context on digital inclusion, which shouldn't come as any surprise to most of you on this call today, but just how we look at digital inclusion. We often talk about the 3 A's. So it's access, it's having access to appropriate devices and internet connections. It's around affordability, so people being able to afford access to those devices and internet connections. And A, around ability, so people having the skills and confidence to really interact in the online world. And I know that's been a focus of a lot of the people on our call today. At the ADIA, we also look very closely at the issue of accessibility. So access for people with a disability, from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and people with other needs, to make sure that we have a fully inclusive access to the internet and the web. So the ADIA has obviously been working to address these issues for some time, but really they've all come to the forefront, obviously, during COVID-19. There's been some great responses from a national perspective. So the ADIA, with a number of other organisations, has been involved in calling for a national digital inclusion roadmap, both during COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. And we've been working closely with the federal government in recent weeks on what that looks like around the issues of access to devices and skills and affordability. Our friends at ACAN have been calling strongly through the Minister for Communications on affordability of communication services. And they've had some great success in that work, working with government and with each of the telcos individually. NBN's announced a $150 million relief package for those on low incomes and individuals and small businesses facing hardship. The federal government's provided $1 million in grants through the Be Connected program for organisations working with seniors to be able to access devices. And each of the states and territory governments has responded. And here in Victoria, just the latest numbers that were announced earlier this week from the Minister for Education, James Merlino, was over 61,000 devices and 23,000 SIM cards and dongles the Victorian government's worked with Telstra to provide. So obviously we welcome all of these measures, but I think there is still a lot more that can be done. And, you know, as I said before, it isn't just as simple about making these announcements and making these policy decisions. It's really about, are these programs and are these devices and internet connections, etc., are they getting really to the people that need them? And that's what we're really looking forward to discussing with today's panel. So each of the panelists is going to speak for about 5 minutes, a little bit to introduce their role and their organisation, some of the challenges that they're seeing in their work, and some of the solutions that they're looking towards. And I know everybody in the webinar is really looking forward to hearing all of those. We've got a really diverse audience, so we've got people from the community sector who are keen to learn from what other organisations are doing. We've got people from government connected who are keen to hear what's working and what's not working from a policy perspective. We've got corporate partners on the line who are interested to what more they could be doing to contribute from their perspectives. And we've also got a number of academics from universities who are going to be really interested in these insights. So as I say, each speaker will speak for about 5 minutes, and then I'll come back and moderate a couple of questions for each speaker. So please do keep putting questions in and any comments in the chat as everybody's speaking, and we'll also have some time for group Q&A at the end of the webinar. So I think I've remembered everything that Ben told me I had to say before we get started. So I'd like to then introduce our first panellist, Marie Foles from the Neighbourhood Justice Centre. Thank you very much, Marie.
Thanks very much, David, and welcome to everyone this afternoon. It's if someone had told me 5 months ago that I'd be sitting on a panel today talking about digital inclusion and the importance of that, I think I would have looked at them rather strangely. But my name is Marie Foles, and while I'm the Family Violence Partnerships Coordinator for the Neighbourhood Justice Centre, which a picture of which sits behind me here today, we sit in Collingwood as part of the City of Yarra. I work within our community crime prevention team and have done so, worked in that space of community partnerships, relationship building at the Neighbourhood Justice Centre since mid-2008. A little bit about the NJC is that it's one-of-a-kind community justice centre placed in the City of Yarra. It was set up in the early opened in 2007, sorry, as an initiative to try and address the causes of crime. So we are a magistrates court. The second level of the building you see behind me today has a single courtroom and single magistrate, and sits as a magistrates court for the jurisdiction of the City of Yarra. What makes it different though is that we have up to 15 odd support services and agencies within the centre that support people either coming to court or also walking in the door from the City of Yarra. So services like alcohol and drug support, mental health support, and other, we have career justice workers, financial counsellors, etc. My team and the team that I sit in within the NJC are part of the support services, strategic management, project innovations. So we have a mandate to be innovative as a centre, and innovative in the sense of supporting our community, improving access to justice, reducing crime, and in fact helping our community become stronger in an effort to stop crime happening in the first place. So we have a very unique position in this space, and we're part of 80 odd comparable justice centres across the world, and seen as an international mentor court. As part of our work, our objectives are to provide accessible justice solutions and make, you know, the community of the City of Yarra even stronger. And all these people around me here are partners that we work with every day, and we don't do anything on our own. Part of that has been to work in the digital innovation space within the centre, and we have assisted in supporting courts in things like bringing family violence applications to an online space. We have a digital e-recovery program for people with who are recovering from alcohol and drugs. We have used digital innovations for internal court processes to replace paper-based processes with online access. All these things to improve access to justice for our communities. When COVID happened, we took what we do face-to-face with a lot of our partners here online, and helped to develop and facilitate our Yarra Community Response Network in response to COVID, and have since that time in mid-April connected with people weekly, on a weekly basis, to support and connect and respond to what the arising issues were. One of those, of course, is what we're talking about today, is about digital inclusion, digital access and availability. And I've been very, it's been very heartening and very proud to be part of this network and working alongside a lot of our community who you'll hear from today in trying to assist in responding to these very important issues. As you'll hear from our other, from Connor and Ray and Ellie and Natasha today, there's some very big gaps that have just been heightened due to the COVID crisis, but we have strengthened our relationships, I think. In fact, you know, we were very quickly able to bring our partners together because of our really strong relationships within the community. And we have in fact enhanced those relationships as we've progressed. So I think I'll leave my statements there, because from our Community Response Network, one of the key issues has been around digital inclusion and access, and one of the subgroups from our larger network has been particularly focused on that, and we'll hear more about that from Connor and Ray today. So thank you for thanks for the invitation to be here and being part of this interesting story and conversation.
Thanks, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Marie. And people, if you've got questions, please pop them into the Q&A box, or I'm also having a look at the chat. So either now or later for Marie. There was one question that came through from Chris, which would be good to get your perspective on, Marie. We might be able to answer it more broadly as well in terms of some of how the programs are working, but it's about how you're getting access, how you're giving people access to sort of end user devices. And I know the other panelists will probably speak about this as well. But what you've seen there and how you've gone about giving people access to devices.
Yeah, sure. We've played a part in that. We are a state government entity. We're part of Court Services Victoria, but we also have had some funds available where we've been able to, as we do at other crisis times, support community for specific projects. And during this time, we've been able to avail ourselves of things like essentials cards that have gone out to a number of our key partners, some of whom are here on the panel today, to provide to our local neighbourhood houses and our centres and the estates, so that people can access more data. And we also, along with everyone else in Victoria trying to source dongles, were able to access when we could and supply numbers of dongles. You know, it was our little part we could play physically to places like Carringbush and Belgium Avenue Neighbourhood House as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marie. And to answer the questions more generally as well, I think there's been some links put in the chat on the Be Connected program and the devices grant that they've put out there, which has been through community organisations to get devices out. As you said, Marie, we've seen a lot of organisations self-funding some of that, and then the other has been the for at least children in remote learning has been the Victorian government's commitment, where they've been providing devices through the education department, through schools to communities, but we know there's been some challenges with that as well, which I'm sure will.
Yes, and just through the network, what that's given us the ability to do is, if we find out something over here, we ensure that someone over here knows about that and can at least access it. So we've helped sort of build those bridges and facilitate those connections and relationships, so that some of that has hit the ground as well, especially through our schools and other networks responding to the schools' access as well.
No, fantastic.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mary, and thank you again for joining us. And I think all of our panellists are going to stay with us until the end for any wrap-up Q&A as well. But next, I'd love to introduce Elle Morel from the Carlton Neighbourhood Learning Centre to talk about some of her experience during this time. Thanks, Elle.
Thank you so much, David. So I too would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal country that we're sitting on. I know it's hard at the moment because we're all over the place. It's probably easiest to think that across Australia it always has been Aboriginal land and always would be. I'm on Wurundjeri land and I pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge any Indigenous people that are present today, and particularly I guess reflect on the very sophisticated communication that Indigenous communities have, and really digital connection is about communication. So yeah, like Marie, I too never have had this experience of presenting to a panel with a hot water bottle on my lap. It's a first, so I'm very happy to be here. Carlton Neighbourhood Learning Centre, we actually have a foot in two camps. We're in the City of Yarra with our neighbourhood house, which is in North Carlton. And at that centre, we have like a big community garden. We also run English classes. We've been there for over 20 years. But we also have a centre in Carlton up at the housing estate, which is in the City of Melbourne. So we benefit from being engaged with both areas. So I actually thought I would just start with a very quick photo, because this really sort of says what we're all about. So this was us distributing computers through a program where we partnered with the University of Melbourne to take off their hands their retired computers that they have at the end of their leases that they do. So they partnered with us to hand those over to our community that really needs them. And basically what I'm going to talk about today is who that community is, and the fact that when COVID started, we had a lot of agencies coming to us saying, oh, we'd love to support your community at the housing estate. Let's do physical education classes and mental health programs. And I'm like, whoa, we're not there. Like, we are way back. And I think this is the issue, that the digital divide was a huge issue for our community that just wasn't recognised, and that there's been for a long time a push to be connected, and just an assumption that by streamlining all our forms online and MyGov and tax and everything, that everyone could do that. And so part of our service at Open Door, which is on the Carlton Housing Estate, is that people who don't have computers come to us to fill in forms. We fill in forms all day. So now that people are struggling with the pandemic, they still have to fill in forms, but they don't have computers to do it. So we're trying to do it over the phone. And one of the first issues we had was, how do you get access, like privacy access to do a form? We'd have, we do three-way phone calls. So I guess we as a neighbourhood house often dealt with that as an individual situation. And the great thing about COVID is that it's broadened out, and we've tapped into some really good networks. In Carlton, I convened the Carlton Local Agency Network, which is a combination of amazing agencies, up to 50 agencies, ranging from City of Melbourne and University of Melbourne right down to the local football club. So together, really early on, we realised the digital divide was a key issue and set up a working group to tackle that. Also, other neighbourhood houses, and a real tip of the hat to BAN, they took a really leading role in this, and you'll hear from Connor, and really gave us inspiration to take this on with that. And also things like today, coming together and getting the spotlight on this issue. I thought I'd just briefly introduce who our community is, so there's more of a deeper understanding of what's going on. So according to 2016 ABS census data, at Richmond and Collingwood, there's about 4,000 residents that live at the housing estates. In Carlton, it's around 3,500 residents across 9 towers. The median weekly income is about $211 at Carlton, so it's very low. In Carlton, it's a really interesting patchwork quilt of income, because we've got quite affluent private housing right next to very entrenched poverty in the housing estate, and also a lot of students and international students. But 49% of the housing estate residents are not in the labour force. It's a very diverse community. At Richmond and Collingwood, around 70% of residents report to speak a language other than English. Across the estates, about 27 languages are spoken. At Carlton, we translate at CNLC into 9 top languages, ranging from Mandarin through to Horn of African languages like Somalian, Ethiopian, Eritrean. And one thing I guess that's important to understand is that too often we say that with digital exclusion that people are disadvantaged and marginalised. But it's sort of strange to me, because these people are not minorities. 40% of the Victorian population are diverse, and they come from backgrounds other than English. And I think being Ethiopian or having 5 children does not make you disadvantaged, but not being included, consulted and considered by policy and marketing, that's what makes you disadvantaged. And that really comes up in this area. I am running out of time. I have a lot of case studies about how people use computers. I'll just very briefly talk about a Somali woman who's a single mum. She has, she's got 7 children. Before COVID, she had 2 children in primary school, 2 children in secondary, 2 children in uni, and 1 unemployed. They had 1 computer. So you can imagine after COVID, to continue learning has been really hard. The school gave them 1 iPad, that's all they had. And she went to buy a laptop for her daughter, had a really hard time because she asked if she could pay it off month by month, and they said her credit wouldn't do that. She was in tears at the shop. This is the issue. So we've been partnering with Melbourne Uni to get computers and devices to people. We've also been trying to do the connection, like working with Jess and Connor to try and get Wi-Fi data. And then we're looking at training people in digital literacy. Wrapped around that, obviously, is the advocacy. And just to finish up, I guess neighbourhood houses are really good. We know our community, we can identify their issues, but we've got limited resources. So there's a real opportunity to partner up with larger organisations and really make a shift on that. And then at the end of COVID, let's be in a better place for these communities. It really is an opportunity to change this. And then we can talk about yoga, Zoom classes and choirs and mahjong lessons, and that would be a really good day. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Elle, and thank you everybody for continuing to go through in the chat, and encourage everybody to please put forward questions or comments in the chat. We've got over 120 people online at the moment, so please keep engaging there. You've got a number of comments for you there, Elle, number of people saying that what you're saying is really resonating with them, kind of the great points around digital inclusion versus disadvantage. There's a question here around wondering whether each of the panelists is able to share more detail on some of these case studies, and all the case studies that you were just speaking about on the family example, whether they're written down anywhere. Clearly they're being shared in today's webinar, but whether you're aware some of those case studies are available.
I'm going to write them up and send them to Ben to send out if that's possible. The one I didn't get to, which really fascinated me, was this family where they are recording on the phone their schoolwork, primary school, and sending audio files to the school every day because they don't have computers.
Yeah. Ridiculous. And just a quick comment as well for people on the chat. A number of the messages I think are just being sent to all panelists that you're probably meaning to click. There's a little drop-down box in the to field that says send your message to all panelists and attendees. So Robert Morcillo from Telstra just sent a link to the Victorian Government's program, but it only went to panelists. So just a reminder to everybody to click that little drop-down and say send it to all attendees as well. So so everybody gets that information. Just one final question, Elle. There was another question earlier on about which university it was you were partnering with, which was University of Melbourne. But whether you want to speak a little more, it was kind of really interesting to me how you go about forming these partnerships with universities and the other groups that you're working with across the community.
So we engage with different departments, and at the University of Melbourne, we've got some really good allies in the community engagement, and they recognise that they do a lot of work. They do a lot of work in Arnhem Land, engaging with Indigenous communities. They do a lot of work overseas, and they've realised that actually in their own backyard, they've got a role to play in Carlton. So they are fantastic. They not only have come on board with this, but they do things like roll up their sleeves and get involved in Carlton Harmony Day, which is a huge thing. And then through that, they get to know the community and identify these issues as key. So yeah, we're really privileged in Carlton, and it is through Clan that we've built up those relationships over the years. So it's not coming in cold with your hands out, it's actually relationship building.
Yeah, fantastic. And we'll just throw a couple more in there that you all are just coming through. So one of them's around how you go about helping people with the significant difficulty of filling in the forms that you talked about. And the other question, which might be related, was around digital literacy training. But how do you work with people with multiple languages? Do you also change the language settings on PCs? How do you work in that environment where you're working with such a diverse community?
I'm so glad someone asked this. I didn't get time. So there's this amazing software that we're trying to get a grant to buy, where you can have interpreters in different breakout rooms. So you can have Somali in one, Vietnamese in one. So we're looking at that for basic training, but what's been found, and I think other panelists will speak about this, one-on-one training is the most effective. So we do some training through CNLC with our English classes, just around, okay, how to use Zoom, how to turn on the camera, how, that sort of stuff. And that's working, but it is for more sophisticated use, like downloading Zoom and stuff, you do need that one-on-one assistance. But also there's a huge reliance on young family members, like kids in your family, to help with that training. And also IT support is your 16-year-old son fixes everything from the computer to the TV, so without them, that's really free labor.
So one final question, and then we will wrap up and move on to the next panelist, but this should be a short one. What's the name of the software that you're trying to access?
It's gone out of my head. I'm really sorry. I could send that to you as well if you want.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I think that's what we'll do after this webinar. Ben will help to pull together all of the resources that people are sharing in the chat, along with some of the case studies I was just talking about, and we can share the name of that software as well. So thank you very much. I'm really appreciating you joining us and sharing those wonderful stories from.
Sorry,
David, sorry, go Elle.
I just want to interrupt. I've just seen in chat, I did neglect to say there is an MOU between City of Melbourne Clan and CNLC and the University of Melbourne. So that's a big part of how that partnership came about. I was negligent in saying that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Elle. So next up, we've got Ray Chin from Carringbush Adult Education. Delighted you can join us, Ray. Over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks David and everyone for having me here. So happy to hear about everyone else's experience and what's going on in the community, because sometimes when we're so stuck busy doing our own little thing in our own little world, we can miss out on some of the amazing things that happen in other organizations. So this is really great for me as well to listen to. So I'm from Bush Adult Education. I'm the Community Development Manager, and we primarily service the culturally and linguistically diverse residents on the public housing estates of Richmond and Collingwood. We deliver holistic education programs with a strengths-based community development approach and specialise in supporting especially those with low language and literacy who are long-term unemployed. So the majority of our clients and learners come from backgrounds of disrupted schooling, trauma, intergenerational disadvantage, and some are very well connected in their communities here, and others are more isolated and have little social support. So we've got a very wide range of community members. And I think, Elle, thank you for describing all the different community members that exist in the City of Yarra. We very much sit in the same sort of boat as CNLC in many ways in terms of our community members and their needs. So just to describe a bit about what's been happening in Bush in the COVID pandemic, all of our programs are being delivered remotely, mainly using WhatsApp and Zoom, and it's taken many months to get the majority of our students online, and we're still working on that today. We've been collaborating with a lot of community organisations like Maria at NJC and Connor at Barn. We've also been redirecting some of our funds to buy SIM cards from supermarkets and distribute them to people who need them. So we've been responding as we go, and these are all temporary solutions in our eyes, and that they're not sustainable for us, nor is it sustainable for the people that we're supporting, relying on SIM cards with limited data on them. So what we have been doing is, over the last 4 months, we've been providing one-on-one support to learners and clients, learning how to use devices, connecting the dongles to the laptops and how to actually connect to the internet, downloading apps. We've been doing a lot of troubleshooting, and the process has been extremely valuable for the individuals we support, and a big learning curve for us as well. But it's also very resource intensive in terms of our staff and clients' time, the cost of devices and the admin behind it all. So that's been on our minds a lot, of how we sustain this one-on-one support, because as Elle mentioned, group support is a great idea, but often it's harder to command a crowd of people when their needs are so individualized and unique. But thanks to our amazing teachers and staff who are really skilled in supporting low language and literacy learners, compared to what we were seeing in March, a lot of our students are now accessing programs on Zoom or on WhatsApp. But again, many of them are relying on these Band-Aid solutions of SIM cards and dongles that are not going to last. So that's our next homework of what to do next. So at the moment, we've got a small individualized digital literacy coaching project for that one-on-one support, and a pre-accredited course as a Learn Local delivering digital literacy programs. And so that's what we've got so far, but we're seeking further funding to expand on our programs and address more issues that are arising as we go. So I just wanted to give a quick case study of one of our students, because it really does paint a picture of what it looks like. And to add on to what Elle was saying about all the different issues that we're facing, there was something that we learned through the COVID pandemic that we sort of wasn't entirely aware before. So here it goes. So we've changed her name for privacy reasons, but she's a long-term Richmond estate resident. She's got low language and literacy, and She lives on her own, and her sister's in a suburb that's about an hour away. So she's quite isolated. She's experienced disrupted schooling, displacement. She's had traumatizing experiences with figures of authority. She's also had issues with debt that she doesn't understand how she got, and she's often dealing with financial insecurity. So in normal circumstances, my accesses services by visiting them face-to-face. She gets support filling out paper-based forms. She accesses interpreters were provided. She likes to pay her bills at the post office, and where she can, she avoids making any changes to her financial arrangements, because when something works, then, you know, we want to keep it. We don't want to change anything. So Mai's been really reluctant to loan a smartphone with data or a laptop with a dongle from Barn and NJC or from us. She's got a lot of anxiety around going over her data limit, of getting charged fees that she can't pay. She's not so sure about cybersecurity. She's got lack of confidence in understanding the fine print and the T's and C's and contracts. She also often mentions that she's heard of her friends who are struggling to pay their internet bills, but don't know how to get help or cancel the service. So after 4 months of helping Mai to understand the risk-free nature of our programs, she's finally agreed to take home a laptop. She's said, oh, I really miss just seeing people's faces, and I don't want to risk my health going to Centrelink physically. So she obviously had a thorough think over what the pros and cons, and she's made a compromise in her perspective. But she only feels safe using a dongle. So she likes the idea of a prepaid service that isn't tied to a long-term contract. So when we suggested the idea of getting financial support and connecting to NBN, Mai refused. She felt too anxious about signing up to something she doesn't understand fully, which we can understand as well. Her lack of, her language barrier and the lack of experience navigating these sorts of systems and contracts and understanding them poses as a real component to what contributes to anxiety. So my story is not the only one. We've been seeing this across the board in our organisation and community, and COVID's really opened our eyes to the numerous layers of complexity in accessing and using digital devices and internet services. It's not as simple as just get a device and get online. There's more complex issues behind why people aren't able to actually connect to online. And I guess what this story shows us is that along with affordable devices and internet, there's a really strong need for community education and engagement in order to increase access and participation for people who are falling through the gaps. So yeah, that's sort of what we really learned that really came up for us during these last 4 months, along with everything else.
Thanks so much, Ray. And there's been some discussion in the chat going on along a couple of lines, but it's sort of building on what you were talking around and that unsustainable position of, you know, you having to go out and buy SIM cards from supermarkets for people that you're trying to work with. There was some discussion on free Wi-Fi in the public housing estates. I don't know if you want to comment on that. I'm sure others probably could as well. But just what solutions you think people could think about that would make it easier for you, so you don't have to go and buy SIM cards from supermarkets as a last resort?
Well, I mean, I think we all know here that the ideal solution is if there was some access to free Wi-Fi on the public housing estates, but that is a big job, and we understand that. But even I think concession rates for internet, just as we do for electricity and gas, that's been something that people have been dreaming about as well. And I guess the collaborative process of providing these supports among community organisations have been so helpful, and we haven't been able to pull it off on our own as a single organisation. So I think that larger collaboration with more stakeholders contributing different bits might be the way to go.
Yeah, no, fantastic, thank you. And there's another question there as well around, for some of the users you're working with who might have anxiety around privacy concerns, how you're working to kind of navigate that. And I'm sure that's even more difficult than ever during this time, trying to do it remotely.
Yeah, so we've got a really lovely partnership with Yarra Libraries. So in the past when we used to do face-to-face programs, we used to have Yarra Libraries come and do a session with some of our clients and learners about cybersecurity and helping them understand what's safe and what's not safe. There is a lot of anxiety about scam online, and that leads to people just completely shutting down and not using the internet. So I think, again, community education and that relationship building and trust is so important. They don't want to, people often don't engage as well when they don't trust the people that are providing that information. So we like to be the link because we do have those relationships in these communities and link them to other services that they might.
Oh, thank you, Ray. So you're breaking up a bit towards the end. I think we did get all of that. So thank you very much, and thanks very much for joining us on the panel, and encourage everybody to continue putting comments into the chat or specific questions into the Q&A. So next up, I'm delighted to welcome Connor Sibley to join us from the Belgian Avenue Neighbourhood House. I think he's got a presentation to share with us as well. I think we'll give him the title of PowerPoint Guru for what he's got to share with us. But thanks very much for joining us, Connor.
Thanks, David. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm from Belgium Avenue Neighbourhood House, and I'm working through the North Richmond Community Capacity Building Initiative. It's a 3-year pilot under the Victorian Government's Social Landlord Framework. So we're working with local community members on the North Richmond housing estate, so whether they live, work or play on the estate. We're trying to improve outcomes for people within the estate. I just want to reflect that any of the views or opinions that I have are of my own and not the organisations that I'm representing. But yes, I guess, so I just wanted to highlight, when I was at university, I saw Julian Burnside, a human rights advocate, come and present, and he reflected on some of his insights of advocating for human rights. And he said, everything starts with a conversation. And this is how our project started, and this is what we've done. So yeah, I'm gonna do a bit of a presentation. I kind of cheated, but I think pictures paints 1,000 words, right? So collaboration has been key to what we've achieved. We started the North Richmond Digital Inclusion Project, which is a range of stakeholders from residents, local services and organisations. And really what informed our approach was that digital inclusion is an equity issue and a social justice issue. So to get a better understanding of what we're trying to achieve, we was about developing insights. So we really wanted to understand what the community need was and to identify any gaps and inform our approach. So we started with phone calls. One resident said, not everyone has the internet, some people can't afford it, kids are missing out, they can't study online, and some people don't know how to use it. From there, we developed a community-based survey, which was multilingual, accessible. We did it face-to-face. We used QR codes. We got community leaders to get involved. So some of the statistics that came from that really highlight that inequity. So a lot of people, their primary devices are mobile, which doesn't give people the same opportunity to engage in education or employment, or looking for employment. A lot of the households, people that didn't have families are more likely not to have the internet. So a lot of the financial hardship packages that are available are tailored towards families with school-aged children, so that some of these people are falling through the gaps. We worked with the NBN to try and look at how many people on the estate were connected to the NBN, and they found that 87% of households on the estate are not connected to the NBN, which is huge when the general community, 85% of the community are connected. Also, there is a caveat with this doesn't include ADSL or 4Gs, so, but it's really high statistics. So some of the concerns that people were talking about was the costs of broadband and mobile plans. So a lot of people are on monthly contracts because they don't want to, as Ray was talking, they don't want to engage in 12-month contracts. And also the cost of owning and repairing devices. Of the people that aren't connected to the internet, the main issue was that they didn't have the knowledge or confidence to do so. Here are a couple of quotes from community. I won't read them out, but it really highlights the diversity of people that we're working with. Some are not interested in the internet, others are worried about the cost, and some think it should be free. So this is something that we did advocate through for the Digital Inclusion Network, as people were talking about before. We've been advocating to a range of people to try and get free Wi-Fi installed at housing estates. But I won't get too much into that right now, but community engagement has been a huge part of what we've been doing. So this is an example of how we responded. We were able to get a Be Connected grant, and we purchased laptops from Enable, a not-for-profit IT recycling organisation. And we partnered with Carrying Bush to deliver and distribute these devices. So that Carrying Bush were able to provide one-to-one training, development and ongoing support. But there are limitations within this project, and I just want to highlight some of these. So for trying to upload software to these laptops was challenging because there's licensing fees. So this is another equity issue where we're getting people free software that doesn't give them the same example or same opportunity to develop resumes or whatever it might be. I think there's a real problem with this. I think we need to look at how people access software, because this is also a security issue. And so we were lucky enough to get donations of dongles from Marie and the NJC, which was a really useful thing. But having to connect these all to a certain telecommuting provider, because we were able to provide 6 months of free Wi-Fi with this grant. So for us to be able to put all those dongles on one account was quite challenging. It would be really helpful to have more streamlined processes where these types of things are easier for community organisations or for people trying to access the internet. So one of the main issues has been advocacy and navigating the system. I just thought I'd show you something that kind of highlights what we've kind of been experiencing, from having meetings with the Minister's office to cold calling telecommunication providers. It's kind of hard to know where to go and how to take this. So the answer is we need telecommunication providers. We invite you to partner with us. We have, as we've been talking, we have these relationships with local people. It's not just, we need government and a range of stakeholders to be on board with this, so that we can provide affordable internet packages and provide information that's accessibly and culturally appropriate. A lot of people are finding it difficult to connect to the internet because they don't know the systems and haven't got the skills or confidence to do so. How you can help? Let's partner. I think we need public and private partnerships where we have these relationships, and I think community engagement approaches that helps people how to understand to connect to the internet in culturally appropriate ways is the way forward. So let's continue the conversation. That's it from me. Cheers.
Fantastic, thank you so much, Connor. And I really loved, I think as some people did in the chat, the hamster, which I think I'm sure everybody can resonate with that challenge with trying to work out where to go and having to speak to so many. So awesome presentation. Thank you very much. And I really liked the call out to telcos and NBN and government and others to come and work with you at the community level. So lots of comments about the hamsters. Also some comments about just again sort of the challenges of the dongles and the contracts and all of those sorts of things. Have you got any final suggestions there that telcos and others could potentially take away and think about, what would be an ideal offering for some of your community members and how then to actually get the word out. So, you know, that was startling to me that 87% aren't connected to the NBN, when I'm assuming it's available there. So what do you think? Yeah, what would an offer need to look like, and how could you help get it out into community?
Well, I think, yeah, so from the Be Connected grant, we were offering some of these financial hardship packages to them and trying to talk them through it. And the being locked into a 12-month contract to someone on low wages is really difficult. And I think also just knowing which provider to choose, like ACAN has put that list together of the financial hardship packages, which is useful. But even for me, I was really overwhelmed by that list. And I think it's just about trying to create packages that are easily accessible, whether it's through community languages and also communication methods. Like a flyer is not good enough. A link to a website is not good enough when you haven't got the internet. Like people don't want to sign up to a contract on their phone. It needs to have a personal approach. And I think that can be through local organisations that have the trust and relationship with community.
Yeah, fantastic.
Sorry, another rant there, but I think that's the approach.
I think it's really useful to hear, particularly that piece around, you know, information being available in multiple languages and simple and easy to read. And we'll make sure we share after the webinar the ACAN resources list as well, which is a really useful piece to go for some of those plans available for people experiencing hardship or on low incomes. So they've done a great job to collate it, but as you say, I'm sure others could work on making the plans a little easier to understand and easier to access and in multiple languages. So thank you so much for your presentation, and you certainly get full marks for the best PowerPoint that we've seen with all of those transitions. And love the hamster in the middle.
I was told to remove that, but I thought that was the best part of it. So I'm glad I kept it.
I loved it. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Connor. So next up, I'd like to introduce Natasha Savic, who, as I said, is probably familiar to many of you on this call from City of Yarra Libraries. Over to you, Natasha.
Thank you. Thanks, David, and hi everyone. So yeah, I'm from Yarra Libraries. I've been working at Yarra Libraries for about 5 years now, and in working in libraries for 20 years. For 17 of those years, I've been training adult learners and seniors, helping them gain skills and confidence with technology. I think I did my first basic computer and Word class back in 2003 to a group of multilingual Greek women. So our focus here at Yarra Libraries is developing a range of programs and services that responds to the community's needs, which is what a lot of the other groups are doing. Where we differ, I guess, is our libraries. We provide free access and public PCs for anyone to use. You don't need to be a library member. We have technologies such as document scanning stations, which translate English text to various languages, assistive technologies like scanning pens that read print text. And I also want to acknowledge the partnerships that we've had in the past with Carringbush Adult Education and Lively, where they've supported us and we've supported them in delivering digital literacy classes to the community. I want to highlight the library staff and what we do. You know, pre-COVID, we do support the community in other ways where we're helping them write resumes to apply for jobs. We're helping them scan documents through emails. A lot of people come in and ask us to help them fill in visa applications, working with children checks, credit card applications. Usually the local post office or bank will send customers over to the library so that we can help them. And, you know, we are a small team and we do the best as we can. You know, people want to join online, social media, talk with family, get onto Skype. We do also get people coming in who've purchased mobile phones and want help with their SIM and phone setup as well. So there's lots of things in that space that we're doing, and we also try and help teach them to be good digital citizens, and then, you know, teaching them about staying safe online. So there's a lot of things that we do for our community. And just some stats for those of you who like data. Pre-COVID, a library welcomes over 60,000 people each month. That's across our 5 library branches in Yarra. And we have over 20,000 Wi-Fi sessions a month. We have over 50 devices that are available, desktop computers or tablets, and we get about 7,000 uses every month as well. So there's some stats prior to COVID. So now with COVID, our buildings are closed, our spaces are not accessible to anyone. So we can only offer support via phone or email, and lots of online programming. So if you want to go and watch some story time, virtual story time or yoga for kids, that's all online. And I understand that a lot of people on the panel have been talking about access to internet and technology for those that don't have it. But I guess we're in the space of trying to build up our online resources for the people that do, and try and help get the others who aren't online or don't have technology, try and help them get to that stage, which is where the partnerships are coming in now. Our Wi-Fi is still on, so if you do live in the area, you can go for a walk and use the Wi-Fi. We don't have a problem with people congregating around the library buildings, so that's been really good. So if you live nearby, I think it reaches about 90 metres and you can get free Wi-Fi from the library. I also wanted to touch on a case or an example of one of our customers in the first restrictions back in March. He had written to the library to tell us that with our first closure, he had no family in Australia, no access to a device or internet. He was cut off from accessing the library, where it was the only place where he could come in, view his utility bills, contact his family overseas, access his email, and all of that stopped because for everyone's safety, we did have to close the libraries. So we did make a call to him, and hopefully we have something that we can pass on to him when we're able to, you know, maybe a device that he can loan. What have we been doing while we have been closed? In the digital space, we've increased our online offerings. A lot of the resources that we have online were only accessible from the library. So we contacted a lot of our vendors and asked them to, you know, change some settings in the background, and people can now join online, create a digital membership and access a lot of our resources from home. So we have things like 24-hour study or homework help. We have Load Online for kids. We have access to newspapers and other databases as well, where anyone can access from home for free with a full membership or a digital membership. We will also in the process of getting 10 iPads and dongles, which we also received through the Be Connected grant. And they'll be ready to trial as a lending program where people will be able to take it home and use it and get some support once we get them ready. Yeah, COVID's highlighted the issue on digital exclusion, and I guess it's connected me to everyone here. I know I do know a lot of people here, but it's really great to meet some new people and hopefully tackle this together. And I also wanted to thank Kylie Carson, who put me in touch with Clan and some of the members there, and I'll be working with them to help develop a training plan so that people who do get access to those devices can go through some basic digital literacy plan to enable them. And I did also I wanted to thank the ADIA as well for helping us put this together, and I look forward to seeing everyone face to face when it's safe.
Thank you so much, Natasha, and I love the library behind you there. It's my kids do soccer at Edinburgh Gardens across the road, and so we in normal times come in and see you at the wonderful library there. And it's a great facility for providing that. And there's comments coming through in the chat around how much these spaces are missed during COVID-19, and I think has made a lot of us realise just how fortunate we've been to have access to those sort of resources pre-COVID-19 and looking forward to it afterwards. There's a number of comments coming through. There's also some comments coming through on people wanting to connect, to kind of share stories and potentially get together around a little advocacy network. So happy for people to either share their information in the chat and or Ben, who's online, can help collate some of that. And so please feel free to either email Ben or get in contact through the digitalinclusion.org.au website. And we can help connect anybody that wants to be connected post this call. One question that was there for you, Natasha, was whether you're providing any facilities, so whether there's any benches or tables around the library or any other sort of facilities, lighting or other access, given, as you say, people are kind of probably joining the Wi-Fi from just outside the library. What you've seen, if anything.
Myself off mute. So no, we don't actually have something that we've dedicated, but this is Bagungananyan behind me, and the building itself does have some benches. So we aren't all there, we aren't in the building, we're at home, we come in and we're packing our binge bundles and sending books and DVDs to people through a courier service. So we do come in and we see people sitting there and accessing the Wi-Fi with their mobile, but obviously we're not encouraging people to come and sit to use the Wi-Fi, but if people are in the area, if they live around the area, then it's on. So yeah, just stay safe.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Natasha, and yeah, thank you for all your work over this time and helping pull these networks together. And kind of taking all of your programs online and yeah, continuing to be involved so deeply in this space. Thank you.
Thanks,
so
David.
much. So finally, I'd like to introduce Jess Perrin, who's our Head of Social Innovation and Digital Inclusion at Info Exchange, for some of what we've been seeing in Yarra and potentially more broadly what we've been hearing from community organisations across the country. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks, David, and thank you, everyone. First and foremost, before I talk about my job, I'm a very proud member of the City of Yarra. I live in Fairfield and I work in the City of Yarra as well. I eat, sleep, play, volunteer in this amazing community, and I think these stories that have just been shared just show how bloody brilliant it is. So thank you for highlighting the diverse, wonderful community that we live in here, and I feel very fortunate to be a part of it. In addition to that role, I am also the Head of Social Innovation and Digital Inclusion at Info Exchange. Digital inclusion is in my title, which makes an assumption that I'm meant to know somewhat about it. So let's test that theory here today. I want to talk a little bit about some of the stories that we've heard. You know, innovation really comes out of need and desire and kind of urgent circumstances. And I think some of the best innovative things come out of community organisations that we have just heard here today, where, you know, you are seeing a problem and these amazing people are working to solve it. So, you know, so much of the need to address digital inclusion, we already know what some of the solutions are because Connor and Ray and Natasha and Marie and Elle are doing it. So we need to figure out a way to make that scalable so that we don't have to have this conversation in a few years' time. A few comments I want to talk about that were coming up where I was like, yeah, which is, when does the internet become an essential service? So I think that was mentioned quite a lot in the chat on the side. When will the housing estates be wired up to the internet like they are the phone or water or electricity? You know, I'm sure there was a conversation a number of years ago around when it would be appropriate to wire up the estates with phone lines. And obviously that is something so far in the past now that it would seem silly not to do it. We need to get to the same place with internet, and that needs to be seen as an essential service so that we do not have to be having this conversation over and over again. And that is as Connor put it, there's a need for partnerships here, and there's a need for us to come together as a community, but private and public, to ensure that these issues are addressed. When we see things, you know, permanently moving online, such as the census, you know, such as MyGov and things like that, we need to ensure that people can access them. Now, digital inclusion is a multifaceted and super complex issue. We know from some of the examples given, handing over a computer to someone does not mean that they are digitally included. It does not mean that they are connected. We think about the three facets of digital inclusion as accessibility, affordability, and ability, and each of them are really hard to address, but we have to start making a dent and looking at those holistically, recognising that it is complex. There is no simple solution. Giving someone access to, as you know, the example, a relief plan provided by a telco or the NBN, you know, may actually make them more anxious around bill stress. So affordability is a real issue here. On the info exchange side of things, you know, I think we've been really privileged over the past couple of months to have a number of these conversations, and digital inclusion has never had more street cred than it has in the past couple of months. So while, you know, I think all of us probably on this call would love to see these issues far behind us, there is a point in time now where we have the attention of the government, we have the attention of a number of our partners in the telco industry, and how do we start making moves where, instead of thinking at an individual household level, speaking to, you know, some of the examples on the estates, how do we start looking at whole estates, whole communities? We've been talking about Yarra today, but this is an issue across Victoria, across Australia, across the world that we are all grappling with. And, you know, I kind of link to some of those examples, and I certainly think to it in our own work at Info Exchange. I think one of the examples that was shared by Connor was that they bought 10 laptops to be able to support some people who were excluded, even though 87% of the residents on that estate weren't connected. We run a program, a wonderful program called Digital Springboard, which is a face-to-face digital skills learning program. We do it all across Australia through a network of 150 partners, many of whom are on this call today. And, you know, we felt very proud to have trained 10,000 people across 2 years. But then I stepped back from that and I put my policy hat on, and I think there are 2.5 million people who are not online. We are not making a dent here. There is so much need for broader investment in this space. There is a need for the government to be able to play a greater role in facilitating digital inclusion here in Australia. And so I think, you know, these community initiatives are just such a beautiful case study of what can be done. But how do we graduate ourselves to the next level? We have managed to do it, like I said, with telephone lines. We need to accelerate the pace on digital inclusion. And there are a number of wonderful things happening. There are a number of governments who are really engaged in this issue. And the time is now. I think, you know, Connor said everything starts with a conversation. These conversations are happening. So how can we collectively work together from perhaps an advocacy standpoint, or just building some of those partnerships? You know, you don't know what you don't know when you're working in different parts of the world. And I've learned a lot in this session today. So how do we start sharing some of the challenges and the barriers that some of our communities are focusing, that are challenging our communities? And I'll end with Elle's piece, which I thought was just so thought-provoking around inclusion versus disadvantage. If 40% of Victoria's population are diverse, that is not something that we should ever be overlooking. And there's an opportunity for us all to come together to think about what this should look like in a year's time, and what this should look like in 5 years' time. And I know that, you know, all of you will have some ideas on that too. So I'd love to hear more and more from the chat as well. Thanks, David.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you so much, Jess, and please keep putting in questions and chat for all of our panel. We've still got some time left for questions. Maybe one to start with for you, Jess, which came through. It's a general question, observation on some of the issues raised, that there just seems to be some big structural issues there around NBN, wholesale retail. There's competition in the telco market. Hopefully that's a good thing to contribute to solving these problems. But, you know, as we've heard from a number of the panelists, the plans and offers are often so difficult to understand. People don't want to get locked into contracts. There's all of the regulation around ID needed for SIM card activation and telco plans. There's building codes that, you know, unlike telephones, necessarily don't require telco connections to each and every housing unit, to your point earlier on internet being seen as an essential service. So, and any ideas on how to kind of start breaking through some of those structural barriers that are inhibiting this?
I was on a call yesterday, and he's probably on this one too, with Robert Morcello from Telstra, who was sharing, you know, from a networking perspective, there are a number of challenges there, even within the housing estates. You know, it kind of makes sense. How can we have public Wi-Fi in the estates? But by the very virtue of how they've been built and the structures and foundations, the Wi-Fi doesn't extend very far. So there are, you know, significant barriers in place, and that's kind of that positioning around, you know, instead of thinking in communal spaces where Wi-Fi could serve multiple people, that won't work in COVID either, because obviously we're not able to congregate in communal spaces. So there are certainly some infrastructure pieces there. I have been, you know, a huge shout out to those that have been able to lower the prices for relief packages through COVID. I think, you know, there are plans that are down to $40 that are usually $70 or $80 to try and help people access that connection. That affordability is a huge piece here, and I know ACAN is doing some really great work on challenging, you know, how do we make this more affordable for all families. There was a question or a comment in the chat around internet subsidy, in the same way other subsidies are provided to low-income populations. So I think there's a lot of thinking that's going on here, and you know, now we have been pushed into this circumstance where it is absolutely crucial. So a lot of the work is already there. It's around putting it into practice.
Yeah, David, I'd also like to just add to that. I think following on from what Connor was saying about engagement in this area, I think a lot of people, and I put telcos and NBN and stuff in the same camp as this, want to do the right thing. Like, it makes sense, you know, we get a concession rate on electricity. If you're on a really low income, it makes sense that you get a concession rate on Wi-Fi. It's an essential service. It's very hard to argue against that. I guess it's about how, there's a lot of nuance in that. Like, how do you go about getting data connected? It's not straightforward. Like, and I think there just needs to be a bit more thought about that engagement of actually talking to people, the customers that you're approaching, because, you know, like I get surprised all the time. Like, people that I work with, they use technology in a really different way than I do. And so I've had to rework, you know, like marketing, put it on WhatsApp. That's just the most basic, obvious thing, because that's how people communicate generally at the housing estate. And you won't know that unless you ask, what's the best way to get out to you? You know, another woman that I work closely with, she doesn't like having Wi-Fi connected. She wants dongles so that she can take it away from her kids, so they're not playing games and stuff. But it's also like the locking contracts. They just often don't work. A lot of people prefer prepaid data. So it's like, it's just, how do you shape those packages that suit these clients? So yeah, I just would really encourage, you know, I think let's get over this, should we or shouldn't we do it? Like, of course we do it, but let's get to the next step of how do we actually make this work, rather than just doing a broadcast thing that we get in a similar problem down the track. Let's actually engage people to shape it themselves.
Thank you, Elle. Such a good point. I don't know whether there's others from the panel that want to jump in on that question. And otherwise, there's a couple of questions here. One is around, it might have been targeted at Natasha, but could be answered more broadly, but whether the library or others have been thinking about pop-ups in shopping centres to kind of leverage the free Wi-Fi in shopping centres and providing mobile devices with sort of sanitising after each use. So it might be difficult in the current stage of lockdown that we're in Victoria, but whether any of the panellists have got any comments on that?
Yeah, I might just make a comment on that. Pre-COVID, so pre-COVID, we with Info Exchange and the Go Digi program a few years back, we did a digital boot camp at the Richmond Citizens Park. So we took our laptops and dongles and iPads, and we set up a little digital boot camp and spoke to people about our services and all the things that we were offering, and they could come in and use some of the iPads. We've had pop-up libraries at the train station with books and Wi-Fi, and again promoting the services and giving people access to internet there. We are looking at, well, Yarra Libraries is looking at Wi-Fi on our van and our bike. And again, so when we are able to go and visit parks, we can bring that. And I mean, there is a cost associated to that, so we've got to look at that as well. But in this climate, it's really hard. A lot of people, you know, they email and call and they say, well, why can't you be like the takeaway, and you know, we can come in and use the computer for 10 minutes and then leave. But you know, we libraries have been classified as, you know, not being essential, so we've had to close. And we're reinventing, you know, the services where Kylie Carlson set up food relief from Bagungananyan, and we're helping send out, you know, food packages to people, and we're including books in there because, you know, we don't want to be sitting at home not helping our community. But we can't open public libraries, but when we are able to, then yeah, we can do all those pop-up programs.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Natasha. There's a number of comments have been coming through in the chat around remote learning in schools, and you know, really this is making the point that it's now an essential school material, just like a textbook might have been traditionally, or an exercise pad might have been traditionally. Whether there's any more comments from the panelists, it really struck me earlier, and we've heard this from lots of community organisations across metropolitan Melbourne, saying that, you know, the school gave them one iPad device for 4 or 5, you know, children in the household, or they just weren't able to get access to the devices and the dongles, which, you know, the Victorian government's been making available. The Education Minister made the statement that there will be no child in Victoria without access to a device and internet, which I thought was a fantastic statement. And clearly we'll try and hold government to that. But whether there's any comments from the panellists on mechanics of what some of those challenges have been and why it hasn't been working.
Yeah, I just sort of give a quick case study. We worked with Richmond West Primary School. Ray and I did a distribution of laptops with them. We did some one-on-one training with the parents so that they could use the laptops and also show the kids how to use it, although the kids probably knew how to use it better than the adults did. But there was some issues with some of the case studies, I think, were that there was one laptop between about 5 people, and the parent was studying, the child was studying, so there was like family conflict due to not having access to a device. I mean, I know within my house, we all have a laptop ourselves. So I think like it's that equity issue. It's like, how does a family survive with one laptop when they've got multiple kids at school? So that would just be one of my comments that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And are you hearing in those environments that the school saying no, they won't provide additional devices? Is that the response that families are getting, or is it more complex?
From what I'm aware, Richmond West has been really, really great in terms of the provision of laptops, and we worked with them so that we could work with people living on the estate to have increased access to devices, so that instead of a family having one laptop, they had 2, that type of thing. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I think like in Carlton, I know they just gave out all their own school devices in the hope that they'll come back when school goes back. So, but there's still not enough for the need. And I think Loretta's made a point in the chat that for adult learners, that just wasn't considered. And if you're a mum, you prioritise your kids' learning. So then, you know, that you don't learn English anymore, and then you can't get a job, and then that's a lifelong impediment, you know, that you've gone backwards in. So yeah, like it's a fundamental need.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ray, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I was also going to point out Loretta's comment in the chat, and how all our adult learners who need education just as much as our young people do are being left out in this digital inclusion for schools programs, which are really fabulous. But sometimes I also see that when we provide devices to parents with young children, when they take it home, they prioritize giving it to their kids because the kids haven't been provided with a device from school. I don't know how that trickling effect happens, where some students at school aren't receiving devices, but there's a real shortage, I think, and parents, of course, put their children first and their children's education first. So there's a lot of adults missing out in this challenge.
They're really good examples, because I think what we're seeing with the pace of how digital has influenced all of our lives in the past few months, what we've actually seen is the digital divide be exacerbated. So, you know, the haves continue to, I'm using digital way more and I'm doing online yoga classes, but, you know, those that were already being left behind are now just so much further, the poles apart are widening rather than shrinking.
Thank you. And we've heard those comments, Ray, from so many involved in the adult education space and TAFEs as well, where students just haven't had the devices and equipment that they've needed. We need to wrap up in a minute. There's still some great comments coming through on the chat. Yen's making some comments around, you know, some of the government programs for devices, and there being challenges. Again, some of the issues we've spoken about around people with languages other than English not being able to engage well in those programs. Sometimes the devices being damaged in other cases, and the parents not necessarily having the digital skills to engage and help the children with those devices as well. So I think they're all things that we need to continue working on. But I think we're probably at time, so I might just reflect on Connor's comment before. I thought, as well as the hamster, Connor said everything starts with a conversation. I thought that was really important, and hopefully we've been able to contribute something to that conversation today. And I'd really like to thank all of our panelists for taking your time. I know how busy each and every one of you are at the moment responding to these needs that we've been talking about over this time. So thank you so much for your preparation today, and then for joining us for the last 90 minutes on this session. Thank you as well to Ben and Ishtar from the ADIA for organising today's session, and as I said before, Natasha for helping us bring together this wonderful group of panellists from across City of Yarra. So finally, big thank you to all of you for joining us as part of this session. We've had well over 100 people on the session today. So thank you for joining us in this remote context, and look forward to seeing all of you soon. If not in person, then at least virtually. As I say, we'll do a wrap up of this session. Ben will send it out, and we have been recording, so we'll share the recording for anybody who's missed it. But from us now, again, thank you very much, and goodbye, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.